Welcome, welcome, welcome. I have a question here. It says, Dear Eric and IBF, I recently listened to your IBF town hall on forecasting during the global pandemic. Thank you so much for putting that together for this community. I have a quick question. We do segmentations. I know how to check on if we have an impact from the coronavirus, but how do I attach this to our current ABC analysis? Signed, Dan Seville. So, Dan, it's a great question, and we're going to answer it for you. Let's get to it. Welcome, welcome, welcome. My name is Eric Wilson. I'm your host for IBF On Demand, the new podcast coming at you from somewhere in the middle of Kentucky, the home of bourbon and Kentucky Fried Chicken. You're welcome. We do have a host for this, Arqiva, your S&OP software solution. Thankful to have them on board and thankful to having you on board as well. So I'm hoping you take a second, subscribe to this channel, share this link, and check out all the other great content IBF has available as well. Recently, we did an IBF town hall. When time I'm recording this, we're going through a global pandemic. I mean, life has changed for most businesses and most people. And we were able to put together a town hall with some experts to address the concerns we had in the business planning, forecasting, supply chain, exactly how do we get through and what do we need to be doing. One of the things that came up was segmentation. And segmentation, I don't care if global pandemic or good times, whatever you're going through, segmentation is a key thing that you need to understand to be able to start looking at your items, your customers, your channels, slicing and dicing them a little bit differently. Segmentation in the good times and bad times has the potential to improve your forecast accuracy. Segmentation is a process of subdividing a large set, whether it be your items, whether it be customers, taking that large set of data and clearly identifying your segments that have similar or dissimilar characteristics. Very similar to what we're talking about in clustering. And there's a lot of clustering algorithms we can actually utilize to be able to help with segmentation. Had a great question that came up after I did one of the previous podcasts. And if you have any questions going forward, please let me know. I'd love to answer those questions. This question was so good, I've actually designated a whole episode to this, and I'm bringing in an expert from one of those town halls and an expert in this to be able to talk to you exactly about some of the things he's doing and best practices. So basically what we're going to be talking about is segmentation, reconciliation of time and space, and any other attribute you want to put together. The expert I'm bringing in is Andrew. Andrew Snyder is from Medtronics. He's a senior transformation manager of corporate quality at Medtronics. Andrew is an award-winning sales and operations planning and supply chain management professional. He's a frequent conference speaker and author in the Journal of Business Forecasting. He's on the advisory board of the Institute of Business Forecasting, IBF. And he's currently employed with Medtronics, the world's largest medical device company. Andrew is a hands-on data scientist, but also an inspirational industry leader with a passion for innovating and advancing the fields of demand planning, S&OP, and enterprise risk management. So I want you to help me welcome Andrew to the conversation. I'm very excited to welcome in Andrew from Medtronics. I'm happy to have him as part of the bunker, as part of this podcast. So Andrew, tell us where you're coming from, a little bit about yourself.
Well, Eric, I always introduce myself as a failed supply chain comedian. I think I've been trying that for 15 years, and I don't know why it's just hard to find humor in our profession, but could be the nature of what we do, but there is fun out there. So some people would call me a damned planner. It must be dyslexic because it's a demand planner. That's one of my favorite parts of supply chain is focusing in on planning, especially in volatile and chaotic times and changing markets. So I've been in the game over 15 years, variety of supply chain roles. But right now, I have the wonderful pleasure of working for Medtronic, world's biggest med device company, and trying to hang my career hat if I can on there, really trying to shape healthcare and try to take best practices from retail, CBG, leaner industries. Not sure if you've seen your premiums, but we're not that lean in our world, and really just trying to drive cost out. So it's a great profession to feel reward in, and I'm very lucky to be there.
Well, good luck to that. And I said I'm thankful to have you on board. We talked about the turbulent times that we're in right now, and humor is great to have in. So I'm glad to have you a little bit more lighthearted to talk about a serious topic of segmentation and clustering during these times. You probably missed the intro, but actually had a question that actually led to this whole podcast and inviting you on. It came from the town hall that we recently did. And if you haven't seen it, make sure you go to ibf.org. Check out the town halls. They're on demand for memberships, so you can check out the virtual town halls we did. Some great content. Andrew was part of that. We got a question after that from a Dan Seville, and the question was asking about segmentation. He said he understood exactly how to do an ABC, and he's looking at his items right now from a list perspective as well, but he's struggling really tying those together. And I thought that would make a great topic for us to talk about. And so you guys some great experience with this. You had some great insights on the town hall. I wanted to bring you in to this audience as well and talk a little bit about that, not only for during these times, but anytime. From a segmentation clustering perspective, how exactly do we start looking at multidimensional and bring that into our segmentation, process? So that's really what I think I want to try to talk to you about, put you on the spot there. But starting off that conversation, why exactly do we need to look at more than just a Pareto?
Well, that was either a great question from an actual practitioner, in which case kudos, because God, that was teed up, or Eric Wilson, you're known by many names, in which case you fed that question. And good on you for throwing me a softball at the beginning here. No, for in all seriousness, I love segmentation. I don't know why. It's because I'm a data geek, like all of us are in this world. But really, when you think about the mountain of data, right, that never gets smaller and grows exponentially every day of what we have to work with, you got to figure out how to sift and sort and prioritize what you're looking at and find the hidden correlations and gems. And what I love about segmentation is like an ABC, classic, right? Your Pareto 80/20. Most people think about it univariate, right? One dimensionally. What's my ABC if I'm sitting in finance from a standard cost perspective, right? What's my ABC if I'm in a distribution center on unit throughput velocity? What is it in widgets per box, right, at a plant? Or what is it in terms of actual demand or point of sale demand as a demand planner? You can look at it from different lenses and you can do your 80/20, right, within those buckets. But how do you take philosophies like S&OP, IBP, or risk management that cross disciplines within a company and really figure out how you pull it all together? For me, what I think is one of the simplest, most practical approaches you can take is a point-based schema. So you determine within your organization what are the various elements of what makes a product important to us from an enterprise level. Maybe cost is king, right? And cost is 60% of the game for you, right? Unit velocity, it's important. It's good for DCs and how we structure the space we have available. That's only 20%. But those key accounts, and even if they're not big winners today, they're going to be in 5 years. And our leadership knows that, that might be your strategic imperative, your account prioritization, your third bucket. You might end up having 10 buckets, margin, ASP, all these other things factored. And once you have your buckets, then your classic bell curve within each bucket can determine how many of the maximum amount of points for that category you can get. So if you're falling right smack dab in the middle of the cost curve, right, you might win 10 points available for that category out of 100 for the total. If you're off on the periphery, maybe not so many. And what it allows you to do is add up all your points and then assign your ABC ranking so that no one individual function is overemphasized in comparison to another. So I've used that when trying to look at S&OP type safety stock levels, right? How do we all agree what's an A product, even if it's an A to finance, it's not to marketing? So that's probably one of the simple, most pragmatic ways you could do it.
supply chain person is going to be totally different than an A to a finance person or A to a marketing person, for example. I
Well,
mean, so you can
everything is
have an A.
people. Let's just state that up front. But go ahead.
Yeah. Yeah, it's relative to whatever function you're in. I mean, an A is
Right.
going to be different between. So it's interesting. You're looking at this kind of this point based type of methodology. Who's really setting the points then? I mean,
Well, if you're the smart guy in the room, you're setting it and do the best you can. But otherwise, if you're a well-rounded demand planner or data scientist, which many of us are hoping to emerge and become, then your job is to be that unbiased voice and help facilitate that. So if you have an S&OP process, SIOP, IBP, pick your poison, you basically already have a platform that's meant to take different perspectives and balance demand, supply, profitability, risk. You just open the dialogue and keep it simple. I want to come up with a way to rank our products in the same way that we try to do it conversationally, balancing everybody in the room. Here's what I'm thinking in terms of the categories. Here's what I think is the weights today. And once you have agreement, then the data inside each bucket is really just the math they don't care about, right? Tell me how many points it falls under. So I don't think it needs to be overemphasized, but the heart of trying to go from univariate to multivariate ABC is a worthwhile endeavor, because I think you can, by the way, you can leave your univariate ones. So if finance still wants to have their own ABC, great. But when they're working in the context of something like risk management or business continuity planning, like we're dealing with at this present moment, you got to take that broader enterprise perspective into consideration.
so example of that then would be, what are some of the different attributes, dimensions that you're bringing in besides just a margin or a
Right.
variability? What else do you bring in?
No, they're quantitative and they're qualitative, right? And landing on those qualitative, right? If you've done your IBF studying for your CPF certifications, you've learned about things like Delphi method and how you can put out a proposal and in a couple rounds of feedback, kind of land on a median of what people think is probably a good, let's say, a point schema for something like strategic imperative. What does that mean? Perhaps if you're doing your segmentation based on geography, it could be a market like Chile or somewhere emerging today that really isn't that big to your business, but treating them as an A or at least a high B in the short term will pay off in spades down the line. And that's where connecting your strategic planning to your annual planning to your tactical nuts and bolts IBP and what we call S&OE or integrated tactical planning is important to take those longer term ranges into perspective. So I would say, in addition to your quantitative stuff, like I said, unit velocity, that could be sales, that could be shipments, that could be demand, ideally. You can take cost, average pricing, maximum pricing for best case deals. You can look at those factors, as well as things like the strategic imperative from a market development, a customer development, customer relationship management. There's a lot of CRM data that you could pull in and be able to say, if you're segmenting an ABC by customer, who's an A, who's a B, who's a C. I wouldn't want to make that determination as a demand planner, but you're putting the onus on somebody smart from sales and marketing to help you out.
So we just went through a whole alphabet there. I think, not only ABCs, but SNOP and CRMs, and we had every letter possible, an acronym in that conversation.
Well, that is part of being in the profession of demand planning, is how many different combinations can you make with the same letters. So,
and we are darn good at that. Yes. And I think we just take those letters and we're going to sort them out, because I think a lot of what we do is sorting and segmentation. And the master algorithm talked really about the importance of sorting. And I think that's what we're talking about, is always sorting that data through segmentations. You have a lot of great points there. My follow-up question then is, now what do we do with that? Is there something we can do with this data?
Yeah. So you've got your not vital few, but your vital lesser areas to focus on, because the long tail continues to grow with customers expecting customization. So you can't put the same emphasis on every code, on every market, on every customer, but on the ones where you really need to. Right now you've gotten to those. What do you do with it? What can you look for? The next best approaches here are going to involve correlation analysis. And I believe very strongly in this. And the IBF has some great, I'll just put the plug out there shamelessly. I do believe it, though. The ACPF, Advanced Certified Professional Forecaster, goes a lot into the statistical approaches for how to conduct these next methods that maybe I could talk a little bit about. So one thing I always like to tell planners is just like you've got siloed mentalities with the approaches to what is an important product, like we just talked about, you also end up having siloed approaches sometimes for how your data is structured when you open up your demand planning tools, right? A lot of us have product hierarchies, for example, that are tied to how your group might be structured with business units, product classes, brands, product lines, product families, things that make organizational sense. But as a planner, force you to have to start to think about things in isolation where patterns may persist irrelevant and irrespective of organizational hierarchy. I'll give you an example in the med device world, right?
Okay.
So if somebody's going to go in and have an appendectomy, oh, my appendix is killing me. They get diagnosed and they have to have that. What types of products do you think might get used in that, right? You might have some laparoscopic instruments. You might have some sutures, some gauze, some staples. Those products might, on a traditional hierarchy for a demand planner, span 4 or 5 demand planners, right? One of them might do general surgical products, another might do instrumentation, another might do kits, and you might end up missing the boat and find yourself in future inability to sell or be an order winner because one of you caught a demand surge, right? And the other one missed it, right? So being able to find the correlation, and that's a medical example. There's other examples in CPG or retail that we could talk about, but what I've tried to do is break down those organizational structures of data to say, okay, I know what's important at an enterprise level now with a multivariate ABC. How do I go through and think about supply policies, stocking policies, or demand plan changes that find the fact that, you know what, let's look at what we have right now in current climate changes, ventilators, right? It's not just ventilators that you hear about in the news. The same surges in demand are almost happening exactly the same on endotracheal tubes and other products that are used in the intubation process of a patient. That for the first few days, everybody was talking about ventilators and weren't thinking through, a vent's not going to do you really good if you don't have anything to plug into it to put into a patient to help them breathe. So those sorts of things are where clustering analysis, right, come into play.
There you go.
You know, and I love clustering analyses, and people love to throw around terms like k-means. That's basically what's called a centroid clustering analysis, right? In simple terms, you have a vector, an array, that'll say, for example, rate of forecast decline or rate of forecast increase. And you're clustering your data points around that might all be subsets of how far away from that average are they existing. It could be your coefficient of variation. I'm seeing the same increase in variability of these tubes and vents at the same time. What do you know? They're in a cluster I didn't previously expect. Or you could have it be changes in pricing, right? On why is my demand bouncing around? You might have a vector that says, well, I didn't realize 2 different marketers were employing a pricing strategy. There's ways to find those correlations, and you don't have to go crazy with going back to school. You can start with online learning platforms from the IBF, from Apex. Hell, YouTube and Wikipedia are a great place to start and play around with your data and build your data science's prowess. There's a lot of ways to find, as a takeaway, correlations and grouping of the data that allow for you to see unforeseen patterns that the way the data is handed to you from a traditional structure might not yield, right?
Well, that's a great segue. I think we're going to so, but kind of encapsulating, I think what you're saying then is you have your segmentation, and you're just using like regular regression or vector analysis, you know, as like to be able to really take that segmentation to the next level and start utilizing it to create efficiencies and planning and looking at that data a different way. I mean, pretty much that's what you're saying, right?
Yeah, clustering I'll put it in really simple terms. Clustering won't tell you necessarily a positive or negative indication, one independent variable on a dependent. That's true regression. What clustering is going to do is help you isolate within your ABC structures or anything else, where are there like patterns in demand? Where should I think about perhaps creating new planning bills that allow for me to look at things as a system, as a total demand pattern and unit, where maybe I end up having to forecast fewer records because I start forecasting clusters as opposed to trying to keep up with forecasting everything independently. It's how you be smarter in the age of ever-growing data. Now, that might be a good segue there, would then be what is regression? So regression would be...
Well, no, I think we're going to be running out of time, and I'd love to get you back to talk about regression. I think the next best segue, you talked about that learning. You talked about being able to learn and things. I think this is a great opportunity to give a real quick plug. You may not know about this, well, you know about it, but the audience may not know about this, but an upcoming virtual conference we're doing on April 28th, 29th, and 30th. We're going to have all the benefits of our regular conferences. I think even more benefits because it's going to be online. We can bring some of the best speakers, some of the largest companies and I think, Andrew, you're going to be there talking as well. So I look forward to that. I want to thank Andrew again for being part of that. The insightful insights, the insights that he brought to it, and the different ways you can actually start looking at taking the normal types of ABC analysis, Pareto, things that you probably are doing today, and how do you add in other attributes into that? And how he's using it today during the current global pandemic, but then also how that relates to times where we have more stable demand, but we still need to segment our items, customers, anything and everything, because it does work for all things. And basically, we're talking about a couple different things. We're talking about a constraint-based and as one, and really a centroid-based as the other. Starting with a constraint-based, this is where your rules-based type of clustering. This is what most people are most common, what most people understand when they talk about segmentation. It's generally taking your items and saying, okay, I'm going to Pareto these. And Pareto is going to say, hey, the top 20% of my items, 80% of my revenue, or top 20% is 80% of my variability, or top 20% is 80% of Y. So it's that Pareto to really identify what your A items, your B items, and your C items. And that's commonly where most companies are looking at. And that's a constraint-based because it's a rules-based. It's taking a predefined rule and applying it to a larger data set to separate it out into smaller data sets. So the definition we have for it is constraint-based clustering is a process for finding any classification scheme that make use of an if-then rules and user-specified preferences or constraints to find a determined cluster. Most commonly, it's a rules-based classifier, or what we're talking about is Pareto. And that works great if you have one dimension that you're talking about. But a lot of what the original question was, and a lot of what Andrew talked about, was multiple dimensions. How can we take more than just variability and apply other attributes to this as well? And one common way to do that is looking at a typical 4-box. And I've seen this played out in a lot of different ways, as long as you have an X and a Y at two different attributes that are related for rules-based clustering. An example may be you take your variability, and that could be your coefficient of variation. It could be your demand variation index. It could be a MAPE, which is pretty much measuring uncertainty. It's taking some way of measuring demand variability on your x-axis, and then your Y, look at forecast value add. So this is how you're getting with a forecast value add versus a naive type forecast. And if you want to know more about forecast value add, I'll guarantee we will be doing a topic. I had another question on forecast value add, and I'm going to bring in another expert to talk about forecast value add in the future. So please, as I said, subscribe to these channels because we got a lot of great content going forward, and we're going to be talking more in depth about forecast value add going forward. In the interim, if you do want to find out about it, demand-planning.com, wealth of information on FVA. It's also available at ibf.org. We have some great articles there from past as well that talks about it. But forecast value add, it measures inputs and processes is basically what it does. So you're measuring how good inputs you're doing and how good the process is making that item forecast better. So if you have on the x-axis your variability, your y-axis are you improving upon a naive, you now end up with a 4-box. And this will be simple as negative FVA versus positive FVA as your splitting point, as your rule. And then a 0.6 on your COV being high versus less than 0.6 being low. Whatever your normal type variability would be, you can have as your midpoint on your X. It divides it into nice 4 boxes. From here, you then can use this for planning. You then could use this for resource constraints. If you have thousands and thousands of items, with limited resources of planners to be able to forecast them, you can't touch every item. But if you have an item that's a low variability, you're getting low forecast value add. So in essence, your naive's doing better than you would. Why are you touching it? So you now have a whole box on this quadrant that says, I don't need to touch these items. Then at the exact opposite up here, you'd have items that have a very high forecast value add. You're getting good intel either from sales or marketing or another external variable that's improving upon that item's forecast. It's highly variable. So systems and aren't going to be able to forecast it well itself because it may have intermittent demand or something of that sort. Those items, guess what? Those are what you need to focus on. And that's just one example. You can overlay cost versus or margin versus variability. You could look at coronavirus impact versus your ABCs. Whatever you want to look at, you can put in this type of constraint or rules-based clustering type of methodology. And that's one common way. The other way you heard mentioned, and the other way we're going to talk a little bit about is a centroid-based. Most typically, this is a k-means type of clustering. Centroid-based clustering is a statistical method for finding relative homogeneous clusters of cases based on the areas of higher density than the remainder of the data set. I said most commonly this is k-means. And one example of this is, let's go the same example. We have our forecast value add on one side, and we have, let's say, bias, or we're using like a mean percentage error as a proxy for bias at the other. So now we have our 4-box of a scattergram of items of where they fall either as a forecast value add or bias. From here, we can predefine the number of clusters we would like. Let's say 3 different clusters. We want to separate these into 3 clusters. From here, it's an iterative process. You either continue till you find the lowest sum of the squared errors, or when there's no change, or you have some kind of stopping criteria. Because you're going through iterations that will then find all the items and where the cluster should be that has the lowest sum of the squared errors for that cluster. Getting a little technical here, but basically what happens is you have 3 homogeneous or separate types of clusters that best fit around the scattered of items. That's basically what you get. So it's a very easy, and I mentioned easy, you could do it as well, iterative process that's utilized to be able to cluster your items into 3 distinct clusters. And once you understand the kind of the fundamentals of that, the sky's the limits for you, because you can look at anything as your attributes. You could look at, the impact of comments versus the impacts of something else on your item. You can, once you start understanding external variables, bringing those in and finding clusters of items that mix. Companies use this all the time. Volvo Mobility is a great example of someone that's currently using k-means to be able to look at their cars, demand, where people are, and different attributes to be able to find out unique clusters that they need to be able to focus on. Burger King, RSI, who is a major supplier for Burger King, they use k-means to better understand different parts of their business as well. There's a ton of companies that are utilizing k-means not only for sorting, not only to better understand it and segment, but then actually just start planning as well. And that's really the next level you can start doing with some of this. Segmentation is important. 80% of our job is just data wrangling, understanding the data, sorting the data. Some of the most important things we do is not necessarily the models and the outputs, it's the sorting of the data before you even starting. Segmentation is a key tool that you understand. We talked about a couple different methods today. There's a lot of other methods available too, and I advise you to look into this, how you can look at clustering, segmenting, classification of your items a little bit better so you know what you're working with and you have those advantages of better forecasting, understanding your items, and being able to plan your resources a little bit better. So with that, take this. Hope it challenges you. Hope it gives you new tools that you can use. I thank you for calling in, for tuning in to this podcast and all the other podcasts. I said, please share. Please make this part of your every other week. We're trying to put these out a couple times a week. Thanks to our sponsor, Arkiva. Arkiva, an excellent job of segmentation they have. They have actually a segmentation model that actually does a great job with a multi-dimensional type segmentation. So you can check them out as a resource as well. And I hope you check out the other resources at ibf.org, the other resources at demand-planning.com. And if you're not currently a member, consider becoming a member of IBF, not only to get future podcast notifications, but journals and other information as well. So hope to see you at a conference in the future, virtually or live, and I hope you tune in the future. Don't forget, wash your hands.